Lamplight Universe presents Treasure Hunters, a Kingdom of Florida adventure. Chapter 2, The Mask of Memories.
With haste and care, we used our swords to hack at the roots of the tree until we could gain access to the stone object beneath. Next, we uncovered its edges and dug around it with our hands, finding that it was some sort of rectangular box or chest, not more than a few feet at the longest side. When it was finally and fully uncovered, Coral made a final brush across its top. Now the engravings were more clear. Etched into the cover of the chest was the shape of a stately stag, its antlers twisting nobly toward a starlit firmament. Beneath that were characters of a tongue with which I am not familiar. Recalling the horrid enchantments of the fruit tree which grew beside us, we took our time in opening the ancient chest. Once the task was begun, the cover slid easily enough, grating stone against stone. Inside the chest was an irregularly shaped object covered in a decrepit shroud. With the utmost care, Coral lifted the shroud. There, inside the chest, was the enchanted object we sought, the Mask of Memories. For several moments, our party stared down upon the mask in awe and fear. I had half doubted the item even existed, but now that we had discovered it, I had 1,000 more questions soaring through my mind all at once. Finally, Coral reached slowly into the chest and withdrew the ancient mask. From the manner in which Coral lifted it, the mask seemed lighter than it looked. The Mask of Memories consisted of a carved wooden portion, shaped like a face only with exaggerated features and glass eyes, and twin antlers that rose from its top like those of the stag upon the chest's covering. These antlers and the wooden face beneath them were painted, though all were chipped and faded significantly. Still, it was an impressive relic. Around that time, we heard a loud roar and the flapping of immense wings, so we decided to bring the mask with us and hurry back to our ship. When we reached the relative safety of the beach, Ginger suggested we try to use the power of the mask before leaving the island, just to be sure it worked. With some deliberation, it was decided that I would be the one to wear the mask. Carefully, I placed the mask upon my face and tightened a strap along the back to keep it fastened to my head. When I finally focused, I realized that the eye holes obscured my vision.
"They're all foggy,"
I said, moving to untie the strap. But Coral stopped me, noting that the glass was supposed to be milky like this. As its wearer was purportedly able to see the past, there was little need for clear vision of the present scenery. I relented, relaxed, and quit my struggling. Instead, I looked ahead, through the tinted glass, and moved forward so that my gaze fixed on the rippling blur of the ocean shore. Then something remarkable happened. The cloudiness of the glass gave way to pure transparency, and I could soon see the foamy waves as clear as if I wore no mask at all. The next moment, the waters began to churn and the sky turned gray. A storm was brewing. I wanted to shout and signal to my friends to hurry for cover, but something stayed my hand. As my gaze was transfixed on the roiling tempest, I saw a small vessel lifted upon the surface of the waters. There was something rather familiar about it, I noted, but the heavy rain that now swept across the sea ahead of me kept it obscured. I stepped forward to look closer, though everything inside me told me to run away. It was at this moment that I realized that I was no longer looking at a scene happening in real time with those friends on the beach of the Island of Beasts. No, this was a vision of the past, and one not so distant, for the familiar ship was recognizable for one reason. It was my ship, the Buenaventura. I held my breath as I looked upon it. My body became tense, as if my very muscles were living through the ordeal yet again. fighting for survival amidst the tempestuous sea. And next thing I knew, the ship was torn in two. I watched as the back half, the portion upon which I had drifted fortuitously into Coral's presence, was swept away and rent asunder. A man with long blonde hair clung to the planks upon which the ship's moniker was painted. It was me. As that other Jesse disappeared, I realized that the front half of the vessel now drifted closer to me. I had presumed that the terrible storm had destroyed the rest of our meager crew, but to my utter surprise, I witnessed not one, not two, but 3 men aboard the drifting wreckage, though their faces and identities were too greatly obscured for me to recognize. Alive. For the moment, at least. Just then, another enormous gust of wind and salt water swept over the halved ship and caused it to split even further into hundreds of smaller pieces. Planks and lacquered boards splintered into fragments, and I watched and waited to see if the crew survived. Sure enough, a huge wave crashed past, revealing all 3 men, shouting unintelligible words to one another across the din. Now separated on their own individual makeshift rafts that could scarcely keep them afloat, the crewmen held tight. The storm and currents shifted so dramatically that the men were ripped away from one another, and I watched in dismay as they vanished from view, lulled south by an immense force. As quickly as I could, I reached behind my head to untie the mask. I gasped for air as I removed it, and shielded my eyes from the blinding sun. What trickery had I witnessed? It was as real as my dearest Coral who stood before me, or Ginger, or Bastion, or any of the other crew members who ventured with us.
Are you all right, Jesse?
Coral's eyebrow was raised in confusion.
It worked,
I muttered, still gathering my bearings and breath.
The mask,
said Ginger.
Did it show you memories that will lead us to the gems?
I shook my head.
Not the gems. My crew. I believe some of them are still alive. Still out there.
I explained the scene that had just unfolded like a full-color motion picture before me. If there was even the slightest chance that any of my crew were still alive out there, I had to find them. I had to rescue them. To my relief, Coral and the others agreed to alter our plans. Our quest for the gems would now include a hopeful rescue mission. Carefully wrapping the mask of memories in a soft shroud, we piled into the rowboat and returned to the Queen Lily, happy to leave the dangerous island of beasts behind us. I remained silent, however, for I could not overcome the shock of the revelation that others had survived the fateful storm. I only hoped that the mask was telling the truth. And if it was telling the truth, I hoped that we weren't too late. By the time we were all aboard the ship, the sun had begun to set, as Bastion angled the vessel toward the south once more, where we intended to survey the next island in this coastal chain for signs of life. I stood upon the deck in silence, leaning over the railing. Coral approached and placed a gentle hand upon mine. I glanced down at the golden ring upon her finger. The symbol of the glowing lamp emblazoned upon it reflected the fiery sky, and my betrothed offered a soft smile.
If they're out there, we'll find them.
Coral always spoke with such certainty and hope. There was nothing naive about it. The Queen Lily drifted across the waters as the sun set at our side. If we were near to another island, it was difficult to tell in the darkness. Bastion and the remaining crewmen kept watch as the rest of us retired for the night. Out in the middle of the sea, we were lulled quickly to rest. Even I, though my mind raced to think of what had become of the 3 members of my crew, drifted to sleep amidst the quiet lapping of the waters along the edge of the ship. We awoke to the sound of an anchor breaking through the deep blue ocean surface.
We're here!
Ginger, delighted, announced our arrival at the next island. Our maps gave us no indication of a name for this particular isle, so we remained in suspense as we lowered the rowboat and moved toward the beach. Coral suggested we bring the Mask of Memories along with us, in case it might illuminate a clue in our search for the Gems of Power, or aid us in discovering my lost crew. She strapped it loosely upon her back. Our feet met the soft sand with relief, happy to be upon dry land. Bastion once again took up the foremost position as our party moved past waist-high palmetto scrub and trekked into a thick patch of trees and bushes, keeping his musket at the ready should another feral creature attempt to harm us. Though the jungle was replete with the songs and squawks of distant animals, none instilled in us the fear that we'd felt on the island of beasts. My heart was put at ease yet again when we came upon a glade of fruit trees, all filled with the most delectable plump morsels. One fruit caught my eye, a small pink orb with thick skin like an orange. As I drew nearer, its sweet scent became a delight to my nose.
Careful!
Coral shouted.
Remember the strange fruit on the other island? And what happened to the member of our crew who touched and ate of it?
The princess had a point. I relented and moved away from the exotic fruit. At this moment, I noticed a set of footprints leading from the tree further into the jungle. Pointing it out to the others, I began to follow the tracks, my spirits rising with every step. Soon, the area became thick and tangled, vines drooping from above as we shimmied our way along the narrow path to follow the footsteps. I heard the sounds of crunching twigs above me, then the telltale chatter of spider monkeys. Then the track went cold, disappearing into a darker, thicker patch of the jungle.
Use the mask.
Ginger suggested to her sister.
Perhaps we can see what happened next.
Coral obliged and began to unstrap the mask from her back. Carefully, she moved it to her face. Suddenly, with a whoosh, one of the monkeys swooped from the canopy upon a loose vine and swiped the mask right out of Coral's hands. As we all stood dumbfounded, we watched as the monkey scurried up a thin branch and began to present its newfound treasure to the rest of its troop. The lot of us began to speak to the monkeys in a sensible manner, pleading with them to return the purloined item. But, to our dismay, the cunning little creatures were disinclined to acquiesce to our request. As a matter of last resort, I began to shimmy up the nearest tree trunk, grasping from branch to branch as I ascended toward the riotous rabble. The monkeys moved too quickly and dexterously for me to catch up to them, however, which caused me great sorrow. Dejected, I returned to the ground to report the news that the mask had been carried away out of sight. It was then that a voice spoke out from between the trees behind us.
"They're pesky little creatures, but mostly harmless,"
said the voice. We turned to witness a sturdy man, clothed in threadbare and faded garments. Our eyes met, and I realized that this was one of my lost crewmates, and he was very much alive. "Jeanmarc!" I cried, hurrying to embrace him. The large man engulfed me in his arms and began to weep.
"Jesse,"
he blubbered.
"I don't believe it. We thought you were gone for certain with the others, but look at you."
I explained the good fortune which had brought me into the path of Coral and her friends, at which point I made the necessary introductions. Then my mind latched onto something that Jeanmarc had spoken. "You said we thought I was gone. Are there others here on the island with you?" Jeanmarc lowered his head.
"When the ship was torn apart, I drifted on a portion of it along with Caesar and Thatcher for a brief time. Another huge wave shattered the remains and caused each of us, clinging to whatever we could find, to be cast into various streams of the current. It turns out, these islands create a curious pattern beneath the sea waters. I ended up on this isle, while the others drifted further south. There's still a chance they're alive, if they were fortunate enough to be dragged onto land as fertile as this one."
I consulted with the rest of my party as Jeanmarc finished his story. As he grew up as a boy on an island in the Caribbean, I trusted his remarks regarding the current, though the waters of this strange kingdom were not subject to the rules and patterns of our world. Again, we recommitted to searching for the remaining crew. If they were out there, We couldn't leave them now.
But first,
Coral reminded us with a gesture to the trees.
we need to get that mask back.
Jeanmarc smiled.
Leave that to me.
He said, and trudged ahead into the jungle, inspecting the small group of monkeys that had amassed once more above us, including the leader who held the mask. Jeanmarc carefully removed a large waxy leaf from a plant and began to roll it into a conical shape. Then he took a deep breath, placed the cone-shaped leaf horn to his mouth, and let out a loud roar. Immediately, the monkeys scattered, leaving the stolen mask behind. In the shuffle, the artifact was rocked and shifted until it tipped over the edge of a narrow branch and sailed toward the ground. Bastion moved quickest, catching the mask just before it tumbled onto the forest floor. Relieved, Coral once again returned the mask to her back, where its antlers poked above her shoulders like spindly wings, and we followed Jeanmarc back along the path until we arrived at the tree with the pink fruit once more.
If we're going to find others,
He said as he plucked one of the perfectly round orbs from a low-hanging branch,
we'll need to be nourished. Take a seat.
Jeanmarc said this with a curious smile as he handed one of the fruits to each of us, and we formed a circle on the soft, mossy floor. We began to eat, noticing that the taste and smell began to shift before us, each shift yielding a sensation more delightful than the one before it. Before I knew what was happening, I felt my entire body begin to grow tired and limp. Suddenly, I fell backwards and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I sensed that I was no longer in the waking realm, but entranced within some dreamlike state. The jungle around me seemed darker and more vast, an expansive space in which I found myself all alone. I stood up and walked around, heading in the direction of the beach in hopes that I might find our ship or a familiar face. Though the jungle twisted and contorted, I soon reached the water's edge and set my feet into the white sands and cool, clear water. I saw no sign of our vessel, but scanned the horizon anyway. Then, from underneath the waves, 3 figures emerged. One resembled Jeanmarc, though his garments were now clean and white and dry. The next figure was cloaked in black, and his face was impossible to make out clearly. The face of the third man was also obscured, this time by a wisp of mist and smoke. While I strained to get a better look, the smoke turned to flame, which quickly engulfed the entire man. Horrified, I began to wade, then paddle, then swim out to them. But no matter how fast or far I swam, the trio was always just out of reach. When I was beginning to lose hope and strength, I felt my body sinking, pulled under the surface of the ocean by an unseen force. I scrambled to escape, but I was dragged under the waters, clasping my mouth shut as I struggled to return to the surface for a breath of air. Then, again, everything went black. I was back in the jungle, where we'd taken our first bites of the pink fruit. The others were there too. I pinched myself to be sure that I was awake. The sting confirmed my suspicions, much to my great relief. Slowly, the others awoke, clearly dazed from their own bizarre dreams. Jeanmarc smiled at me, clearly no stranger to the effects of this fruit.
What did you see?
He asked. I told him and the others of the 3 figures, of the shadow and smoke and fire. As it turned out, the others all experienced dreams with similarly peculiar themes and imagery. The enchantment of the fruit must have some connection to the fears or emotions of those who eat it, I surmised. It seemed to me that the figures in the dream might represent my missing crewmates, though I feared that the lack of clarity presented in the trance could only mean one thing. Do you think they're... I couldn't bring myself to finish the thought. Jeanmarc shook his head vigorously.
Just a dream,
He said.
They could still be out there. Best not to read into it too much.
Then he added,
But the effect of this fruit is known to be somewhat potent and visionary, though I know little of what its apparitions could mean for us.
I wasn't so sure I wanted to know what these dreams meant. A portent of things to come, perhaps? There was only one way to be sure.
Shall we continue our voyage to the next isle?
Coral had already risen and moved back toward the beach. The rest of us, in agreement, followed closely behind. Though the conversation about the curious dreams had turned us somber, our joy was soon restored as we celebrated the discovery of my long-lost partner Jeanmarc, while we readied the ship for its new course.
Treasure Hunters, A Kingdom of Florida Adventure is a production of Lamplight Universe, based on the Kingdom of Florida novels by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Treasure Hunters is written and produced by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Starring Femi Kozlowski as Coral, Ben Tidwell as Thatcher, Jedidiah Montalvo as Jeanmarc, Comfort Olugbuyi as Ginger, and Taylor Thomas Smythe as Jessie. Narrated by Nicole Johnson. For more adventures, visit kingdomofflorida.com.